My name is Megan Maulden. I am a graduate student at the University of Arkansas pursuing a master's degree in animal science, and my special topic for this course covers equine atypical myopathy. Equine atypical myopathy is defined as a non-exercise related rhabdomyolysis syndrome that occurs in grazing equines, and it mainly affects the respiratory and the skeletal muscles of the equine. It can be found in all equid species, so that includes horses, of course, ponies, donkeys, zebras, etc. And it has a very, very high mortality rate, and there's no specific treatment that is associated with equine atypical myopathy at this time. Equine atypical myopathy was first reported sporadically around the mid-20th century, with the first recognized case coming from Scotland in approximately 1984. It was again described in some journals and at a presentation by scientists and practitioners in 1985, and this was following a huge autumnal outbreak that occurred in Great Britain. And the first large outbreak was described approximately 10 years later. The large outbreak was defined as having over 100 cases in the outbreak, and it occurred in northern Germany. Originally, it was named atypical myoglobinuria. Sorry, I butchered that. Atypical myoglobinuria, and its name was later changed to atypical myopathy. It was considered an atypical rhabdomyolysis syndrome, specifically due to the lack of supplementary feeds that were being given. These horses that were exhibiting symptoms were almost entirely fed on pasture with no supplementary feeds, and they also weren't showing high amounts of work or exertion, and there was a very, very rapid onset of death. The clinical symptoms of atypical myopathy in a lot of ways kind of resemble the symptoms of colic, except for the horse doesn't have a loss of appetite. Some of the clinical symptoms of atypical myopathy include muscular weakness, stiffness, recumbency, which is just kind of leaning against things and wanting to sit down and not move a lot, respiratory difficulty. It's especially characterized by dark colored urine. It's almost like a dark chocolate brown color in the urine due to excess amino acids. It also can be congested mucous membranes, sweating, muscle trembling, especially when the horse moves. There's a lot of muscle trembling, depression or lethargy, and towards the end of the horse's life, unfortunately, they start to exhibit an inability to stand. They start lying down, and then death usually occurs within 72 hours. A lot of times diagnosis, an official diagnosis doesn't take place until after the horse has already died, because of course the horse dies so quickly within 72 hours of the first signs of illness. But some of the ways that it can be diagnosed is by looking at muscle tissues and doing a necropsy. These three pictures here show what some of those muscles look like. Of course, you can see the rhabdomyolysis, which is the damaged muscle fibers that enter into the bloodstream. You can see them here on the PowerPoint with the little asterisks. Also, there's intracellular lipid droplets that can be found in the skeletal muscle, which confirm the lipid accumulation myopathy. The top portion of that picture actually shows like the little red spots. It's the lipid droplets that are accumulated, and then the bottom picture shows like what a normal skeletal muscle should look like without lipid accumulation. And the picture on the far right shows the muscle discoloration that's really common. This horse had a necropsy done, and you can see the pale and darker red areas of the skeletal muscle. So the way atypical myopathy works in the body, it's characterized by a lipid storage disorder of the beta oxidation dependent skeletal muscle fibers, particularly type 1 fibers, which are more prevalent in young horses. The lipid storage disorder has been identified as an acquired multiple acetyl coenzyme A dehydrogenase deficiency. That's a mouthful, so it's often abbreviated as MAD, M-A-D-D, and it affects mitochondrial dehydrogenases. horses that use flavin adenine dinucleotide, or FAD, as a cofactor. MAD has been shown to affect human patients following the ingestion of fruits that contain hypoglycin A, HGA, and both HGA and MCPG, or methylene cyclopropylglycine, have been found in the samaras and the seedlings of Acer species trees that are in the Acer family. So as we kind of mentioned, most evidence points to that HGA or even the MCPG that's derived from plants in the Acer genus as being the cause of atypical myopathy in horses. In North America, the most common species that is thought to kind of cause this is Acer negundo, which is the box elder maple, and then more predominantly in Europe especially, the species is Acer pseudoplatanus, which is the sycamore maple. Some other risk factors or theories and commonalities among equines that are affected by EAM that haven't been ruled out as contributing to it is low dietary selenium, Clostridium sorelli lethal toxin. Rain or thunderstorms can cause it. It's thought to have kind of a meteorological influence or impact. Of course, cool temperatures without having a heavy frost, so kind of around like fall temperatures. I've already said it's more common in young horses because they have those type 1 fibers in their muscles, and also horses that are in a low level of exercise or work. And it's also really common in horses that are found grazing in pasture for more than 6 hours per day. Some other things that are thought to contribute to it is the condition of the pasture. Cases have been linked to pastures that have a lot of trees or dead wood, and especially like dead leaves and leaf litter in the pasture. There's also been seen sort of a correlation between sloping pastures and high incidences of atypical myopathy. Also, pastures where other horses have died, and any pasture where horses are permitted to eat their hay off of the ground. Outbreaks are pretty common in Europe, but it's especially common in Belgium, France, and Germany. Some of the I've listed here, I won't name every single one of them, some of the many countries that it's been identified in, but as you can see, most of them are in Europe, but then it's also been identified in the United States and New Zealand. And it predominantly occurs in the fall and the spring, most of them being in the fall, but fall and spring are pretty much entirely when outbreaks of EAM are going to occur. Sadly, the prognosis with a horse that's affected with EAM is not very good. The survival rate is really low, and most studies estimate it to be only about 30%, and even the most generous estimates of survival rate are only around 55%. And most horses die within 72 hours. Some horses can live as long as 10 days, but again, it's pretty rapid from the time of the onset of the illness to the time that the horse is going to pass. Partly because we haven't fully identified the cause, or we haven't ruled out the other possible causes. There's also no treatment for EAM. There's no antidote or specified treatment, and the care that you can provide is only going to be symptomatic or supportive in nature. Treatment is often unsuccessful even when it is provided, and it's also very labor intensive and expensive. The horses who do survive don't show any immunity whatsoever, so it's not something that they think that can be vaccinated for. So since it's so hard to treat, and since the survival rate is so low, prevention is really the key to being successful. Some of the symptomatic or supportive forms of treatment include stabling a horse prior to the signs of recumbency or hypothermia, avoiding any physical effort or stress, using some muscle relaxants or anti-inflammatories which can keep the horse comfortable, providing fluid therapy and a carbohydrate-rich food, which encourages aerobic metabolism, which is thought to help. And then supplementation of vitamins B, C, and E, supplementation of selenium or carnitine. And then also, if you ever notice that a horse is sick with EAM, its pasture mates need to be removed from the pasture immediately and stabled as well in hopes that they will not come down with the illness. Talking more about prevention being the key, really special attention needs to be paid to young horses and non-working horses since they're the most likely to contract EAM. The high risk seasons are fall and spring, so that's really when you want to be on top of your management, and you want to watch out for local outbreaks. If there is an outbreak in your country, then that's something to watch for. Honestly, the best way is just to remove any Acer genus trees from your field. And if you do have any of those trees in your field, you need to remove the leaf litter and the dead wood from the pasture. You also can limit pasture time in the high risk weather to less than 6 hours a day. You can provide supplementary feeding so that the horses aren't eating as much pasture. And then of course don't provide your hay or your supplementary feed on the ground. Another thing is to regularly exercise your horse since it's not seen as often in non-working horses. And you can avoid spreading manure on the pasture, avoid pastures with previous deaths on them, and avoid pastures that have natural waterways such as standing water or rivers since it could be carried through a water source. And just honestly pasture management, so rotational grazing, fertilizing, things like that to make sure that you have a healthy pasture that your horses are eating on. Here I've provided my references that I used for this presentation. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you so much for listening.